Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue learning today about terrestrial biomes. Again, these are biomes that are on Earth's surface, not the water, but all the land. And we talked about half of them the last time I saw y'all, and we're going to talk about the other half today. So thank you so much for making it, and we'll go ahead and get the ball rolling on this. Okay, so the next type of biome I want to talk about is called a temperate rainforest. Okay? So where's the location for this? Well, you can find them all over the place. North America, the Pacific Northwest, the Appalachian region. You can find this in New Zealand and Australia, as well as Northwest Europe. Okay, the vegetation here is coniferous or broadleaf forests. So depending on which one you go to, you can have those evergreen trees or you can have the deciduous trees. Also, vegetations you'll find here are mosses, ferns, shrubs, and berries. So they have a little bit of everything, right? Okay, the precipitation here is heavy rain. Anytime you see rainforest, that is telling you that is a forest where it rains a lot, right? This is the temperate rainforest, but we'll also talk about the tropical rainforest later on today. Okay, the temperature here is kind of moderate or temperate. It's right there in the middle. It averages anywhere from 39 degrees to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. So, and that's annually. So it doesn't really get that cold like the boreal or the tundra does, but it doesn't really ever get super hot like the desert does either. It's kind of right there in the middle. The special feature here is that the definitions for this type of biome actually vary globally. How we define a temperate rainforest in America is a little different than how they describe it or define it in Australia and New Zealand. And again, they tend to have different vegetation sometimes. Another special feature of this type of biome is that there are the presence of microclimates. That means that in some areas the temperature can be a lot different than in other areas. And the reason for this is due to the heavy shade of the canopy. These trees are very, very tall. The top part of the trees, where sometimes it can block out the light, is called the canopy. Because these trees are so tall and there's so many of them, it can be a lot colder at the bottom of the forest than it is, say, high up where animals have their nests and stuff like that. So in some areas it's warmer, in some areas it's colder. Okay? Let's look at some different animals and vegetations of this area. Okay, so these are just kind of all over the place. And the far right picture over there, I just kind of think of the Pacific Northwest here in America. So think of like those Washington forests, big, tall trees. They're kind of close to the ocean. That's where the bald eagles live a lot. Okay, but they're just they vary across the globe. Some things that are similar about them is that it rains a lot and that there's a lot of trees, and those trees can be either evergreen or deciduous. Okay? Great, let's go to the next biome. So next up, we'll talk about the subtropical desert. Okay, this is one that people tend to be able to wrap their head around pretty well. The location here is that it's between 15 and 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Okay, the way that the air currents work on the world, right there by the equator, you tend to have those tropical rainforests. Right as you move away from the equator, about this 15 to 30 degrees, there's an area where there is not much rain. And so you tend to find deserts in the same area geographically. Okay, the vegetation here are cacti, agave, aloe, and succulents. Okay, some animals that you might be able to find in the desert are camels, snakes, aurochs, lizards, Gila monsters, and the fennec fox. And we're going to look at some pictures of these animals here in just a second, but both the plants and animals that live in this biome have to have special characteristics that make living here easier. Because you can see on the next bullet point, the precipitation here is very little. This is the driest biome, and animals and organisms tend to do a lot better where there's water. So when the water is scarce, they have to have special characteristics that make living there a little bit easier. Okay, the temperature here is that it's also very hot. So the desert is the hottest and the driest of our different biomes. Okay, the special features here is that there is extreme weathering and erosion going on. So we know that the deserts are very, very hot during the day, but at night they actually get really, really cold. Because there's no vegetation, when that sun goes down, it can get freezing pretty quickly. And because of this extreme heating up and cooling down, all the rocks in this area tend to be broken down very quickly by that, okay? Animals tend to sleep during the day. So imagine you're living in the desert, right? It's very, very hot during the day. You don't want to go out during the day. So a lot of these animals tend to sleep during the day. They're nocturnal, and they do more of their hunting at night when it's not quite as hot, okay? And so that's one characteristic how they can adapt to live in this area, okay? And let's look at some other characteristics that these animals have that make living here a little bit easier, okay? So one that y'all already know about, let's look at that bottom left picture. That's a camel, right? Camels very good at living in the desert. There's kind of a misconception about them. One characteristic that's so obvious about the camel are those big humps on its back, right? When I grew up, I learned that those were filled with water, but that is not true. These humps are actually filled with fats or lipids. So the same way that those bears and walruses and whales have that blubber to help keep them warm, kind of in a different way, the camels use the fat or the lipids to help them survive extreme temperatures, very, very hot climate. The way they do that is, so those two humps, it's filled with fat. Fat is, the technical term is lipids. When they can't find food, their body will start to break down that lipid, starts to break down that fat. Through that process of breaking down fat, it releases a little bit of water. So in a weird way, this fat is able to, they're kind of getting two birds with one stone, right? They're able to live off of it for nutrients, but by breaking the fat down, it also releases water, and that helps to keep them hydrated. Okay, let's look at that top picture, top left picture. That's the fennec fox. When you look at this picture, what's something very obvious or different about it than some other animals? You might notice that it has these really, really large ears compared to how big the animal is. So having those large ears that stick up like that actually helps to regulate the body temperature of these foxes. There's a lot of blood vessels that flow in those ears, and they're able to release heat a lot easier through their ears. So having those big ears helps to keep them cool and not get overheated in the temperature. Some of the different plants that we were talking about, cacti and aloe and those different types of plants, succulents, these tend to do very well in this area because they're good at conserving water. Anytime it does rain or there is any precipitation, they soak all of it up, they hold it in their tissues, and then use them as they need to until it rains again. So that's how cacti and those succulents are so good at living in this very hot, very dry climate. Okay, great. Let's go to the next biome. What are we looking at here? So this is a savanna. Another name for this is a tropical grassland, but I think you'll mostly see savanna for this. Okay, where is the savanna? Well, the location for this is that it tends to be between the tropical rainforest and the desert biomes. The vegetation here is grasses, so it's kind of like a grassland, but with shrubs and isolated trees. So a savanna and a grassland is very, very similar. A savanna will just have more trees and more shrubs than a normal grassland would. What type of animals do we find here? Well, because it's like a grassland, we find a lot of grazing animals, but we also find very large, diverse animal communities. So you can find zebras and hippos, rhinos, antelope, giraffes, elephants, termites, lions live here. So some of the most iconic and largest animals in the world live here in the savanna. Okay? The precipitation is semi-arid to semi-humid, so it doesn't rain as much as a rainforest, but it's not as dry as a desert. It's kind of there in the middle somewhere. The temperature is that it's very warm, okay? Not as hot as a desert, but still very hot. And the special feature here is that we have large, diverse animal communities. So like I said earlier, zebras, rhinos, giraffes, elephants, lions, you get these very large animals that all find a way to live together in this biome. Let's look at some pictures from this area. Okay, so you can see here, this kind of gives you an idea of what it's like. They do look like grasslands, right? Definitely on the left, those two pictures on the far left, those look like grasslands, but you just see more trees and more shrubs here, right? And then we have very large animals here, elephants, giraffes, and lions all live in the savanna. Okay, great, let's keep this going. Okay, the next one up is the tropical rainforest, okay? The tropical rainforest is near the equator. That's where you're gonna find these. All along the equator, that's where you'll find these different rainforests, okay? There's rainforest in South America and Africa and also in the Indonesian island chain. That's where the rainforests are, and they all line up along the equator. Now, when it comes to the vegetation and animals, you can see that I just wrote half of all plants. And what I mean by that is half of all plant species is in the tropical rainforest. Half of all animal species are in the tropical rainforest. So I could have listed them out, but we would be here all day reading all of them, right? There's a lot of different types of plants in the rainforest. There's a lot of different types of animals in the rainforest. The precipitation here is that it's very, very high. It rains a lot. That's kind of where it gets its name from. Okay, the rainforest, right? It's raining a lot here. The temperature here is that it's very, very hot. Other than the desert, this might be the next hottest biome, okay? What's the special feature here? So kind of counterintuitively, the soil in the rainforest is very, very poor. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. What happens is anytime something dies and decomposes into the ground, it releases all of its nutrients there, but because there's so many plants that live in the rainforest, as soon as there's any nutrients there, they just soak it all up. So the rainforest soil is not very nutrient at all. It's very nutrient poor, okay? But there is high biodiversity, and I wanted to take a second and talk about what that means. Now, we've talked about that prefix bio, right? Bio means life. What does diversity mean, right? Well, to be diverse means to be different. And so what's going on here, biodiversity means different types of life, okay? And that's usually a sign of a healthy ecosystem, is when you have high biodiversity. You got half of all plant species are in the rainforest. Half of all animal species are in the rainforest. So that's very high biodiversity, okay? So great, okay, last thing I wanted to do today, let's look at some pictures here and then we'll move on to the last thing. These are some pictures of the rainforest. It's very tropical, lots of plants, lots of animals. Over there on the right, that's a velvet worm, which I didn't even know was a thing, but that just goes to show you how many different types. There's animals in this forest that you've never even heard of before, right? And plants in these forests that you've never even heard of before, right? Okay, last thing I wanted to do today, let's look at this graph, and I want to see if we can kind of start walking through and filling in this graph with some of the different biomes that we've been talking about. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what our axes are, right? We got the y-axis that runs up and down, and we got the x-axis that runs left to right. Okay, on that y-axis, on the left, it's running up and down. What is that tracking? One of the very important features that we've been talking about every time we go to a biome, we mention this. Okay, you might remember that this is the amount of precipitation these biomes are getting. So whether it's rain or snow or sleet, whatever it is, how much precipitation is it? If you're at the bottom, you don't get much precipitation, and the higher up you go, you get more and more precipitation. Okay, what about the x-axis? What is that tracking? Well, that's tracking a different component that's very important called, that's the annual temperature, right? And so the farther left you go, the colder you are, and as you go to the right, you get warmer and warmer and warmer, okay? So I wanted to start off with that bottom left biome. You can see according to the graph here, it is very, very cold, and it does not get much precipitation. A hint for this one is that it has that permafrost and that you're not going to get much trees here. Does anyone remember what that's called? That's called the tundra, right? Think Antarctic and Arctic circles, right? Very, very cold, not much precipitation at all. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're looking at kind of that green area. I told y'all earlier that this is very similar to the tundra. It's just not as cold. There's not that permafrost. You do get trees here, right? The trees tend to be cone-shaped. Does anyone remember what that's called? That's called the boreal forest. And again, a nickname for that is called the taiga. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to the boreal forest as the taiga, okay? It's very similar to the tundra. It's just not as cold, and there's a little bit more precipitation. And because the permafrost isn't there, we have a lot of trees growing in the boreal forest. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is at the bottom. It's kind of that tan to orange part at the bottom. The hint for this one is that there are no trees here, but there is a lot of vegetation. So what's that one called? That's the grasslands, okay, temperate grasslands. And you can see right above it, that red area is called woodland and shrubland. I just kind of lumped that together with grasslands. They're all very, very similar. It just depends on if you have more trees than grasses, right? Okay, let's go up one more. So kind of that blue part there in the middle. The hint is that this is what Mississippi would be considered. We have seasons, and with the seasons, the trees do different things. When fall comes around, the trees lose their leaves. And when summer comes around, that's the growing season. So what do we call that? What I want us to know for this one is the temperate seasonal forest, or sometimes you'll hear people call it the temperate deciduous forest. And that was the word I was using, was deciduous, right? Okay, let's go up one more from that. Okay, so this one is, kind of think Pacific Northwest. This one is very similar to the temperate seasonal forest, but it gets more rain. So this one is the temperate rainforest. Okay, so again, think Pacific Northwest, eagles flying around in those high forests, right? Okay, let's go to the bottom right corner. Okay, the hint for this one is that it is the hottest and the driest of the different biomes. Okay, this one is the desert, or the subtropical desert, right? So great. Let's go up one more from that. This would be pretty close to the desert, but there tends to be more vegetation. The vegetation tends to be more grass-like. There's large animals that live in this biome. This one is called the savanna, right? And you can see another name for it is the tropical seasonal forest, but a lot of people just call it the savanna. Okay, let's go to the top right corner. That's one of the hottest, one of the wettest biomes. It has half of all animal species, half of all plant species. What's that one called? That is called the tropical rainforest. So y'all, thank you so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.